Hey, I'm Mark Tillison, and this video around Google Merchant Center data and data issues. Just focusing in this video on this invalid UTF-8 encoding. So what the hell is UTF-8 encoding? Why is it invalid? Where does that come from? And how do we fix these invalid UTF-8 encoding issues? So you can have this UTF-8 encoding issue in a description or in a title. And where that comes from, essentially, it's just, you can go and Google what UTF-8 is, but it's just basically a method of encoding data and what that looks like. So it's basically a text format. So if we look down here, we can see the rejected attributes, and we can see the issue here is in the description. And this happens quite a lot. So remember, typically how the data is getting into the Merchant Center is you'll have a site built with WooCommerce, like this one is. You can see that's WooCommerce. So it might be WooCommerce, it might be Shopify, it might be Magento, it might be BigCommerce, any number of e-commerce platforms. So typically what's happening is we have a bunch of data in our database on our e-commerce store. We will have a product title, we'll have a description, we'll have a price, we'll have availability, we might have a brand, we might have a Google product category, those sorts of things, shipping weight, product type, okay? And that's stored in our database along with the title and the description. Now what happens a lot of the times is so that data is in your database, and then typically that's going to be exported every night. Typically we recommend around 2 a.m. that you write an XML file on your server, and then Google Merchant Center is set to go and fetch that XML file at 3 a.m. every day once that's been updated. So that's how you keep your data up to date. It may be if you're using Shopify that you're using an API, you may be using a third-party feed management platform, something like that. But basically the data is coming from your data in your database. And what happens, and in fact what looks like has happened in this case, is the data that is being output for the description field is basically the long-form content within WooCommerce, which includes all of this stuff. So we've got H2 tags, we've got strong, we got divs, we've got paragraph tags, we've got H4s. There's a whole bunch of things in there, which, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't kind of matter to Google. It can understand it, but I think probably what's causing the issue is that character right there, would be my guess. So it's kind of non-standard characters, and really we don't want those in this data. So that's why that's rejecting. And if we look at the feed, we can see that's where it's coming from. So what you might have is we might have a raw feed, we might have a supplemental feed, we might have some rules in Google Merchant Center which are kind of augmenting and editing and amending this data or creating attributes. But in this case, we can see the source problem is what's coming from the feed. So how we fix that is go back to the beginning, and we change what the output is that's coming out in that feed, ideally to get rid of all of this heading tags and P tags and close LI, close UL, all of this HTML basically, and this EM and strong and all sorts of stuff. We don't want that in there. My guess is it's probably this registered trademark, I think that is just that item there. So ideally, go fix that in the source data, stop outputting in that way. Ideally, you want just normal paragraph of text without all that HTML and without these unique kind of characters with these symbols, and other symbols would cause this as well. So that's most likely to be what's causing that. I've had issues with this particular issue around UTF-8 encoding in the past, where a feed is being passed through a third-party system that is then processing it, and then it's kind of double encoding that UTF-8, and that can do some weird things with kind of spurious characters and things. So that's where the issue comes from. The outcome from that actually in this case, if we look at the final attributes, is that we have a title, but we don't have a description for this product at all. So it's probably still being listed, but remember, any search terms we're trying to match this product to, or the search terms that Google's trying to match this to. So if we're doing something around 9x9 ventilation, for example, telescopic cavity liner set, or something around void, none of this is being crawled. None of it's being matched. It's because Google's basically going, I don't know what that is, I'm going to ignore it. So it's limiting the opportunity for your ads to match keywords, and that means they're not showing as often as they could. So you definitely want to think about fixing that. I would suggest this is a systemic issue. If you change the method of output in the feed to stop outputting all of this crap that isn't needed for Google Merchant Center, then that is going to solve problems for any existing products with this UTF encoding problem. So it's going to solve all of those issues, but also it will save any future issues as well. So number one method of solving the UTF-8 encoding problem is to fix it at the data source coming from the feed, and that will fix that. If you cannot do that, there are a couple of options available to you. I would suggest that probably the ideal one is to add a supplemental feed. So there is a video on our channel, I'll link to that in the description, about how how to create a supplemental feed using a Google Sheet. And effectively what you do there is pick up this ID. So you create a sheet, you can export all of these issues basically. You can create a sheet where column 1 will be the ID, column 2 will be the description, and then effectively you can manually kind of do a find replace H2 with nothing, replace strong with nothing, and you can tidy up that data and effectively create a nice clean description without the UTF issues in it. Okay, so and effectively you just keep that sheet up to date. It will update automatically every day and it will keep that data clean and tidy. Okay, the challenge with that, and why I always say fix the data in your source, is because what happens when you add a new product next week? You're then going to manually have to go and create a description and clean it up and put it into your Google Sheet. What happens when there's a problem in 6 months' time when the description you realize on your website is slightly wrong? Maybe these sizes are wrong or something, but you need to change something. You change the description on your website, but forgetting that there's then a description in a supplemental feed which is overwriting it. So now the error in your data that you've now fixed isn't been fixed because it's then being overwritten by the error you still had. So now you've got to think, I've got to change it in 2 places. So that's why I don't particularly recommend using supplemental feeds for things like this, because the data could still be presented incorrectly in Google Ads or matching things in the wrong way, because the final data you're going to end up with in Merchant Center is version A comes from the website and version B then overwrites it. So if you fix it here, still broken here, it's going to overwrite it, it's still going to be wrong. You're also going to run into problems where you've got data in your supplemental feed which matches things that aren't in your feed anymore because you don't sell them, they're out of stock, whatever else it might be, and then you're going to issue saying, well, hang on a minute, you've given us these 10 products with supplemental data but they don't exist anymore. So what do you do then? You go and delete them, and then a week later you get the things back in stock and you have to go round in circles and fix it. So ideally don't do that, just fix it in your data that's coming from your website. There may be, I've not come across them, but I would imagine that there is a method of parsing this data to strip out all of this UTF-8 stuff. So you pass your feed through a processor that then strips all of this junk out, and then you take the feed from the processor. So effectively the database outputs to your feed outputs to a processor outputs a feed, a different feed, and then the Merchant Center fetches that feed. So effectively there's some processing in the middle, and that would be a better kind of automated way of doing it. I guess you could, if you were kind of a glutton for punishment, you could create some rules in Merchant Center to strip all that data out. Again, I wouldn't recommend it. Really you want to fix this at source. So hopefully that explains where you're getting this UTF-8 encoding problem from. This particular example, I think it's that little beast there, which is why there are so few products in this particular account that are affected by it. The UTF encoding, by the way, is not specifically around this H2, these heading tags and strong tags and, H3s, H4s, all that kind of stuff. That stuff's okay. Google will allow it. That's not UTF-8 encoding. The UTF-8 encoding is specifically around these odd glyphs. So it will be only affect certain products where you have that, or if you've got other issues of how that data is coming out or being processed, that could cause it as well. But effectively, it's a non-standard character that Google isn't expecting, and it's kind of going, I don't know what that is. Give me it in proper language I can understand and I can crawl, and then I'll be really happy. So that's how you fix the UTF-8 encoding issue. I hope that has helped you out. If it has, please give this video a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe for more videos on Google Shopping and Merchant Center.